Analyzing case studies. Case studies are a common way to approach analysis in schools, particularly at the upper level. I know many of you have already done them in maybe your strategic business class or other courses, and others of you may have less familiarity with doing them. We want you to assume the role of a manager, to step into an authentic situation for business communication and make sense of what you see, draft a plan, take action. So let's talk about then why you should study case studies. There's a quote about Harvard Business School from a book called Management Communication. Quote, Harvard Business School began inviting executives and managers into classrooms after their First World War, unquote. Harvard had hoped to provide students with some insight into what does a successful business person think like. They knew they had students who were coming in with lots of different levels of experience, and they wanted to build off of that, but also take the students further. Not long afterward, professors started writing down things. So they wrote down narratives of the managers they had in the classes. They went and started interviewing people. And what they wanted to do is think about the ambiguities, the complexities involved in what does our commerce looks like? What does administration look like? What does management look like? The goal was to have in the classroom an assignment where the answers move away from that rote memorization. This was a change way beyond business schools. Universities began expecting less memorization of texts like, the Iliad around the 1910s, 1920s, and more focus on application and understanding. They wanted to think about how to blend theory and analysis. They wanted to understand how to practice better understanding, and particularly with understanding how the communication processes create and shape organizational events. They wanted to develop abilities, and that's bottom line. So why are we still doing it now, almost 100 years later? Well, the goal here is advancing critical thinking. We want you to improve your analytical skills and practice for when you're doing the real thing in the workplace. What you'll see on the screen right now is all from Harvard Business School's long guide and books about doing this. And actually in this lecture, just to point out, I'm going to be mixing Harvard and USC's Marshall School of Business. So I'll try and point when I'm going from one to the other. I'm like literally meeting right in the middle because we're in Texas, literally right in the middle. All right, so first off, Harvard wanted and still wants students to think about sharpening their skills. So one of the goals here is how do we think and reason rigorously, and we're doing this specifically in this class, thinking about communication, reasoning how we do communication. The case study provides a focal point of exchange. So everybody is coming into this classroom right now. You're listening to this lecture with different work, internship, life experience. Everything is different, right? And these cases are going to give us a central point and topic for analysis. So you bring your experience, but a case is going to give us something neutral for consideration. I know before I started doing this, I'd have classes where maybe I'd ask for someone to share their experience, but then talking about what that person experienced at that company isn't nearly as useful as everybody talking about a central point that we can analyze. The goal here, or one of the other goals, is to develop a set of principles for practice so you can respond more quickly and appropriately when in the workplace. Think of this as figuring out not some shortcuts, but just making it so you can reason faster. And the last one here, I have a quote from two scholars about this, where they say, quote, the goal, or one of our current goals, is to develop greater understanding of the ways in which communication is central to getting work done. So there are three basic types of cases that you'll experience in classes. And if you already know this, you can scroll to the next slide. But I did want to just review what we've been doing so far in class and then what you're going to be doing in the next couple of weeks. First off, we have field cases. So these are cases that are written by professors. Some schools like USC will have their students write the cases and then have other students solve them. Usually they involve some insider information. So that would be an interview or other public information like business news or public filings. The second type of case is called a library case. One that we do pretty frequently in business communication is looking at Enron because we have so much public data information online. Of course, with Enron, we're not able to go there and interview people. It is a long gone company, and we're not accessing special insider information. That can be data and cases built really just off of what they're able to put up in a database. And then the last one is going to be an armchair case. So this would be a fictional case based on realistic situations. Our book has a mix of these between field library and armchair cases, but it's useful to know which is which. One, because it's going to save you a little bit of time. So if a case is an armchair case, you know you don't need to go look up those public filings to better understand it. But if you're in a field case and it's referencing a real company at a real moment in time, you know, well, I need to go get maybe some more information or do more research. For your assignment, and really this works pretty well for most case studies, I'm going to go through a couple of different points on how you can do or start a case analysis or case analysis project. First off, read. And this should be simple, but it's really not. So the next really couple of slides are all about reading the case. First thing you want to do, or my recommendation would be to read the first and the last, either page or if it's short, first and last paragraph. You want to go ahead, and this is just a shortcut here, tip you off on who are the key characters. Is there an issue that's really obvious that's mentioned? Were there any questions asked? And why is the organization in this situation? Usually tips for that or giveaways are going to be at the opening and the end. Then I would read again and sort of go here, read really quickly, looking for the type of industry and company, if there's a specific department that's the focus. Again, that's why I look at the beginning and conclusion to see if it hints at that. Why or how are the key characters communicating? What are the relationships? So think back to task and relationships earlier in the semester for this class. Why are they in a situation? What are their communication challenges? And then think about, well, what questions do I have? Or what should I start to ask? Then I would go through and read the case really slowly more than once. And ideally, I would break it out so you're not reading it all on one day. I would do maybe the first 2 slides I just went through and then get to this one, read the case really slowly, and then go set it aside. I would let it rest, let your mind kind of clear from it, and then come back the next day or even a week later, ideally, but at least to the next day, and then start identifying the communication issues, the elements of communication that were effective, frameworks, organization, what's the situation, what's the time frame. So start asking those upper level questions. And I want to point out on this slide, this is for our class because it's communication. If this were a different type of class, I would replace that word communication and some of those other questions with whatever your class focus is. And then I would annotate. Annotate, just a big word for taking lots of notes. So physically print it out, mark it up, develop a hunch. I love the quote from USC where they tell their students to be mutually exclusive, completely exhaustive. So not looking for overlaps, really thinking about every single possibility, but then not letting yourself get distracted too much with every single possibility. So the next couple of slides, and there's 2 or 3 different ways you can do this, but I want to give you USC's approach to case analysis because I think it's just excellent. They have a process called the USCCT. I don't know if you remember that. USC, that's case test really, but the problem solving process. So they want you to think about developing a really good framework for critical thinking about problems and opportunities. So analyzing the case, like this is just one model on how to do that. So let me go through then their 5 steps. The first off is you're going to think about uncovering the potential problems, challenges, and opportunities. So you want to focus on goals. You're thinking here about naming the issues, defining the issues, putting the issues in context, thinking about the issues from multiple perspectives. So maybe from the point of view of a manager or corporate board or of an employee, thinking about is there a window of opportunity to fix the situation, and then what are you going to do? The next thing you're going to do is thinking about what is our most critical problem, our challenge, our opportunity. Here is where you need to prioritize. Thinking about how can I support this? How can I clearly and concisely explain my reasoning? A good trick at this moment is if you're in your group project for this class, think about how would I explain this case and what's going on to my group members. You might also think here about specifying an objective or ranking the issues. I think the solutions is on the next page, but what more Harvard Business School here, but Harvard Business School would say the next step would really be to identify and rank issues looking for timeliness and connections. But you see that here too, where they're thinking about magnitude, quantifiable, and non-quantifiable. The next step on the USC process is to create a potential multitude of solutions. So some people would focus here on the issues. USC focuses here on solutions. So you've narrowed down your problems and challenges, and you're thinking about how can we start to do something about it. You want to provide evidence here, so it's not just coming up with random things you think will work. And you want to think about how this connects. So what's related for our solutions? What works on the short term? What works on the long term? You might also think at this point, how am I going to start to communicate this solution? So in a management communication case, you're going to think about perhaps identifying who are the key audiences is one thing that's not on here. But in communication studies, thinking about key audiences for your message. So identifying who you want to communicate with, what's going to matter to them. This does have, and I think the last one too, the idea of we have lots of different stakeholders here, but I want you to think about how you would plan to transmit that message or that communication solution so it's received and understood for different audiences, and how you would analyze feedback with those audiences. For example, who would you speak with first? So after generating these ideas, we're on our fourth step here, you want to narrow them down to those that are going to be most effective. And again, those that can be communicated effectively with different audiences. So thinking about solutions that are prioritized, the types of supports you would want to use, our pros and cons, what resources would we need here, and again, how do we tell this to the people who need to know this? The last one is translating your solution into an effective implementation plan. So you want to identify the key steps, you identify the hurdles, what's going to go wrong here, how are we going to address it, and I will be looking for that. Considering unintended consequences, and then doing a really good final check. So you're thinking about our implementation, our flaws in logic, and what we're going to do. Beyond that, for our classes, or for many classes, you'll then also either have to write it up or prepare it for an in-class discussion. So that means you need to pay attention to the instructions for your class, or if it's a case study competition for that case study. Some professors are going to cold call when they do this as an in-class assignment. Others will do breakout groups. Others will do write-ups of submissions. Some professors are going to do this as a longer assignment. So be really aware of not just how you're translated it into an effective implementation and communication plan, but how am I doing that, and then getting across that I have done that to my professor. So it is an additional communication challenge there. All right, big point, let me go back, I've already said this once, but you do consider how am I going to communicate the solution, how am I going to focus on getting the main things across, and how am I going to present that to my class, present that to my professor, communicate about it to my group. Going back to the beginning, our goal here is for you to get better at critically thinking, at reasoning effectively, at thinking about the interrelationships between solutions. And later in the workplace, or even now in the workplace or at an internship, being able to reason more quickly, make decisions more appropriately, and implement the solutions you see to communication problems more effectively.